Welcome to the Pindown, your Detroit Pistons podcast. I'm your host, Wes Davenport from Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys.
And I'm Blake Silverman, writer for Detroit Bad Boys, covering everything from the Pistons to the NBA draft and the Motor City Cruise.
And all right, guys, so we've got a lot of news to cover in this week's episode. The Pistons really threw quite a bit at us here in like the 5 or 6 days after the draft really happened. But before we get into any of that, Blake, happy 4th of July.
Happy 4th of July. Yeah, I'm happy we took some time out of our day to come and talk some hoops, but it's nice to just spend some time with the family, do all the festive things. So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to talking some basketball.
Yeah, me too. And YouTube user says I'm over here in an echo chamber. So I do apologize if I have any audio feedback going for this episode, guys, either live or over podcast. I am in the Chicago area, so I'm not home at my mother and father-in-law's house. So I'm in the back office. They've generously lent that over to me, which has been great. But if it's a little echoey, that's why. But Blake, want to ask you, what's the 4th of July plans for you guys? You maybe a dinner or something going on? What's happening?
Man, honestly, don't have too much on the docket. The wife and I are just doing a last minute going over to some friends for a barbecue for dinner. We got a newborn at home, as you know, Wes, and most of the listeners know. So it's kind of hard to be out for the whole day and everything. But gonna see some friends, see some family, and we have some family weekend plans as well. So how about you? What do you have on the docket?
We're just hanging out here in Chicago. I mean, I'm always drinking something on the podcast, but this time it's actually alcoholic. I've got the Line and Kugels going. Just, we got to celebrate the summer a little bit here on the 4th of July. But you know what? Let's dive right in. Blake, I really am curious. I want to get your complete thoughts now. Obviously, we did the live show and got kind of all of our instant reactions to Ron Holland. And being the 5th pick there for the Pistons. The following day, the Pistons then selected Bobby Klintman with the number 37th pick. We didn't have much of a chance to really speak about that. So, I was curious, with you being our NBA draft scout expert here, what are your complete thoughts on the Ron Holland selection at 5? And then if you could give the fans a little bit of a rundown of who Bobby Klintman is as a prospect, what they got there early in the 2nd round.
Yeah, so after thinking about the Ron Holland pick a little bit more after we reacted to it live, pre-draft, I was struggling with his fit in Detroit, and that wasn't really because of the Pistons itself. It was more so thinking about it as what's best for Ron Holland. I just thought, because he was asked to do so much for the Ignite, if he could go somewhere where there's a clear lane, a clear role for him to start out. But now thinking about it, thinking of him in Detroit, the pick makes sense, because I always thought that he was he has the most potential to be a star in this draft class to me. And if there's a ton of unknown within the team personnel wise, other than Cade Cunningham, I think Ron Holland could be a great running mate with him. And then you also, as of now, still have the rest of your young guys and are adding some talent around them. So the pick really does make sense to me. I understand the philosophy. Yes, the jump shot needs work. Ron Holland is super young. He has a ton of time. We've all heard of Fred Vinson coming in to help some of these young guys with their shots. So I feel like in this class, more than any, you're in a position to take these swings, and that's probably what you should be doing any year with a top 5 pick. So I don't know. I like it. I'm interested to see what his role is as a rookie. I feel like it'll be a bit on the smaller side. But overall, I think you're bringing in a guy with true, maybe secondary star potential, maybe even more, to add alongside Cade Cunningham.
All right, so here's my question for you then, because I think Ron Holland has a heck of a lot of potential as well. But just for the listeners, what type of, quote unquote, star potential does Ron Holland have? If everything breaks right for him, what is the type of role he would take? What is the type of even output you might be able to see from a guy like that on the wing?
Yeah, so the comp that is always brought up, and I mean, honestly, I kind of even hate to bring it up if it sounds lazy, is like a Jaylen Brown type role. Like Jaylen Brown's a really unique player. So I'm not saying that Ron Holland could be Jaylen Brown, but maybe a similar type role. And going into this draft, like he was known hyper athleticism, a great slasher, and is really an active defender. And that is something that like Trajan Langdon has talked about in his press conferences. Like defense has to be a thing that you want to do. And just watching Ron Holland, like it looks like he is definitely aggressive on that end. And then that just allows him to get out quick in transition, turn defense into easy offense. So the swing skill for him is obviously the shot. Like if that comes along, he can probably be a 20 point a night guy eventually. Not saying that you're going to get anything close to that immediately. But that's the upside with Ron to me. And I like bringing him in where the franchise is now, because you do have some time for him to work on his skill set while you also made these additions of Tobias Harris and Tim Hardaway Jr. that allow you not to like throw Ron Holland into the fire immediately.
Though the one thing that I think is really exciting about Ron Holland that this roster really doesn't have outside of Cade Cunningham is that Ron Holland is wired like a scorer. Like when you watch his film in the G League, and this isn't saying that he's going to be a guy that could get you, like 20 a night right away. That's not going to happen. But long term, right? The way he played in the G League, he looked for his own. He was very good at getting to the free throw line, very good at creating space, creating advantages, and he looks to attack those. So, like, you compare that to a player like Jaden Ivey, who is also very good at doing those things, but he's not as aggressive as a finisher around the rim. He's not as aggressive hunting for his own shot. That's not a knock on Jaden Ivey. That's what kind of makes him so exciting as a secondary creator type of guard. But Ron Holland doesn't have that as much. He's not selfish. He's willing to pass, and he will pass when the option is there. But the man's looking to get buckets. And I think that having a player with that type of potential out on the wing to really be that second, maybe even first level scorer, where he's going to be pushing close to or over 25 a night one day in the future. I think that's pretty dang exciting.
Yeah, and I think what you brought up about getting to the line is a really interesting point. And I think Bryce brought this up on the Pistons Pulse. And Ron got to the line almost 4 times a game in the full season with the G League. And the G League does the 1 for 2 or 1 for 3 free throw. So that number is even a little bit skewed. So I think he really is a guy that is going to put pressure on the rim and get to the line, which, I mean, we've all watched this team the past few seasons. Like Cade wasn't getting the whistle that he probably should have, and I think that's going to get better and better. But adding a guy like Ron Holland that can do that as well, I think helps create some easy points on the line too.
Yeah, and guys, when you're looking at those G League stats for Ron Holland there, if you want to get excited, that free throw number, look at that as fouls drawn. On average, he drew over 4 fouls per game. That is pretty incredible. But let's talk about Bobby Klintman here. He's kind of been a little more unheralded. Most of the excitement, most of the conversation going to Ron Holland. But could you give us just a quick little scout on Bobby Klintman as a player, and then what you might think fans could expect out of him in his rookie year?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to read verbatim something I wrote on DBB. I did like a bunch of prospects, like really the top 30. I think I ended up at 31 names, and doing a quick like sales pitch if they were and were ending up in Detroit. Bobby Klintman was on that list. I actually had him at number 31 on my board, so right on that first round line. But my pitch for him to Detroit is he's a big wing who had some draft draft buzz last season after his freshman year at Wake Forest, but decide to withdraw from the draft and head over to the NBL to improve and polish his game. He improved as a shooter over there and impacts both ends of the court. A team can plug him into any lineup as a versatile option who can move off the ball and hopefully knock down shots. Klintman's skill set at his size is his calling card to me. If he improves as a defender, he can potentially play as a small ball 5 in spurts within certain lineups. If the Pistons still had held their own pick at the top of the second round, which we saw them trade and move up, that allowed them to select Klintman, he's in a group of high upside wings that I'd target. So if Trajan maneuvered around the draft board or makes a move for additional picks, Klintman's an exciting two-way option. So when the Pistons traded up to 37, Klintman was in the group of, like, I thought they would target a bigger wing. Like, I think Ron Holland's a wing, but I think one at bigger size. Johnny Furphy from Kansas was still on the board, and he ended up going to Indiana a couple picks before. So when the Pistons were on the clock, like, Klintman was the guy that I would pick. And really that's just because he fits the archetype that we're looking for, a bigger wing that can knock down shots. I don't know how much self-creation he'll ever have, but it just adding someone at his size that can shoot the ball. He's been a little inconsistent in his pre-draft years, but if he can polish that up, I'm assuming he's going to spend a ton of time in the G League at least this season. I think he could be a real rotation piece eventually, and at the very least, an end of the bench guy who you can use in like a break glass in case of emergency scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, I really like him as kind of a two-way four-man who maybe could play down a position, but like you said, much more likely to go up to the 5 in some small ball lineups. I'm with you. I think, year one, probably a lot of time with the Crews, but he's an exciting prospect. And I like to compare, guys like this to what Pistons fans, what we saw out of Isaiah Stewart at the 4 position last year. And if we remember, the one like crippling limitation that he had offensively was just that he couldn't put the ball on the floor. Like, Isaiah Stewart's a very, very good shooter. He's a very good two-way floor spacer. But because he can't really attack a closeout, he did not generate as much space for the players around him as he otherwise could have, because he was playing a 4 position where if you could just sprint out at him and make him put the ball on the floor, you kind of won that possession if you were the defense. Bobby Klintman's not that guy. He's similarly sized. He's a very good defender as well, and he can shoot it. But he could also attack a closeout if you need him to. He could put the ball on the floor and occasionally make something happen, be a threat that way. So, I don't know if he's ever going to be like a starter or anything, but he's a good prospect. I'm with you. I think he could really have a role. Before we get into free agency and coaching decisions, wanted to ask you just what you thought of that trade for moving up to Bobby Klintman. That was basically the Pistons' end of the second round pick to move up to 37 and get Wendell Moore Jr. So what did you think of the value?
I thought it was a good value trade. I would be interested to know if Bobby Klintman was who they targeted to move up there, or if there was another name. I was tweeting out like a bunch of names that could be on their list. Like, there were a couple of those stretch bigs that fell into the second round that I thought would make sense when Kyle Filipowski fell. Tyler Smith was there, even Jonathan Mobo. Those guys were all off the board by the time the Pistons were on the clock. Johnny Furphy, like I mentioned, was taken too. But there was a huge list of guys that all fit an archetype that the Pistons needed. So I was thinking that you're moving up as far as you could, and you're only taking on a couple million in salary as the price for that. It made sense. They probably still could have got a good project, a good player at 53. There were some interesting names that came off the board right before that and even after that. But a lot of people in like the draft community had Bobby Klintman as a first round grade. So I don't hate the outcome of it at all. And I think it was a very small price to pay. And the Pistons are still sitting here with over $25 million in cap space that we don't really know what they're going to do with yet. So it made sense to me. I would just love to know, which we'll never know, if there was a different name that they were targeting with that move.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I guess we probably shouldn't discount Wendell Moore Jr., right? I mean, he was looked at very positively as a prospect just a couple of years ago. He's a good shooter. He's got good size for his position. He could kind of moonlight between the 2 and the 3. There's still potential there with that guy. You might be able to get something out of him. It's not guaranteed by any stretch, but still a good flyer to take, I think, there for just a salary dump and moving up about 20-ish spots in the draft. But let's get on to the flurry of moves that happened right after the draft. So JB Bickerstaff gets hired as the next head coach of your Detroit Pistons. He gets a 4-year deal plus 1/5 non-guaranteed year, which is essentially like a team option, I guess, for the head coach. They signed Tobias Harris. He gets 2 years for $52 million, no options there. So it just comes out to about 26 per season as an average annual value. And then Tim Hardaway Jr. and 3 seconds for Quentin Grimes. So let's start there. Let's start with that one, Tim Hardaway Jr. What did you think of the value there for that trade? And then what do you think of THJ just as a player getting added to this very, very young Pistons team?
Yeah, I think THJ, I mean, he had shooting. That's one of your biggest needs that you need to address in the offseason. He only has 1 year left on his contract. As we've seen, the Pistons are still sitting with a ton of cap space that we don't know what we're going to do with. So THJ takes up a part of that, but not a huge chunk of it. I like the move. The only thing with it for me is like the what if of Quentin Grimes in Detroit. He was obviously the prize piece when Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks were dealt at the last trade deadline, and injuries and everything like plagued his short season. I think he only played like 6 games as a Piston. He's still an interesting player to me. I mean, I hope he does well in Dallas. I don't know if there just wasn't a future for him in Detroit. I know there've been some rumblings on whether he wanted to be here or not. Like, we don't know if that's true. I just think that he made sense and fit the timeline of the roster a little bit more. But he missed all that time. We don't know what the injury is like now. And Sean Corp wrote a great piece on Detroit Bad Boys about THJ and Tobias and how they've just played like so many minutes, and really like the availability piece of these moves. A lot of the signings and trades that the Pistons made were players that were on the shelf and missed a ton of time with free agency. So if that's the price to pay for a player that's going to help raise your floor shooting the ball, and is also going to give you 65, 70 games a year, I'm okay with it. I just wish we got to see a little bit more of Quentin Grimes as a Piston.
Yeah, me too. I really liked him, but at the same time, we do have to admit that he had a very down year last season, and almost all of his value is in the shooting that he can provide, along with the defense that you're getting. Like, we know Quentin Grimes is a very good guard defender. What we don't know is if that 3-point shooting was real that we saw early in his career, or if this most recent season is what he really is from deep. And that's a really important question when you're about to have extension talks with him. He's on the last year of his rookie deal. So I think that combined with the roster crunch that the Pistons have, I mean, this is one of before these two moves, Tim Hardaway Jr. and Tobias Harris, the Pistons had the youngest roster in the NBA. I did the quick math on it. On average age, they would have been 1.5 to 2 years younger than the Spurs, who were the youngest team in the league last year. So adding playable veterans to help, take some pressure off all of these young players was something that was really important. And when you're looking at a guy like Quentin Grimes, who he's got the potential to be exactly what you want out of that two guard position, either off the bench or as a starter one day. But you don't know if he can actually give you that 3-point shooting yet. And you're starting to have those contract extension conversations. Like I get it. And one thing I do think is getting a little overlooked with this trade is just how valuable those second round picks are, Blake. Like
Yep.
with the new CBA, all these teams getting hard capped, those second round picks are cheap, cost controlled assets. And it's not like the Pistons had no second round picks. They did. They had one, I believe, for every single year for the next few seasons. But for a rebuilding team to not have more than that, I'm just saying the cupboard wasn't exactly stocked, right? They had enough. They had second round picks. It wasn't barren, but they also didn't have a surplus, which is really what you want right now, because what they could do is those teams that are competitive, that are, your Denver, your Milwaukee, teams that are usually at the back of that first round, when they're really in that salary crunch and they're getting nervous about being hard capped, you can trade one or two of those second round picks for a late first rounder. That is something that we've seen happen over the past couple of years, and it's more likely to happen now as we're moving forward into the future with this new CBA. So those 3 second round picks are a big deal. They're not nothing. It's not just a throw in. I know it's not a first, and a lot of people, we would have wanted a first to take on, more of a contract dump like Tim Hardaway Jr. is. But at the same time, like you said, he can play. He's going to fill a role for this Pistons team, and they need a guy who can chuck up, 5 threes a game like Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to do. So I actually really liked this one. I really did. I wanted to ask you too, just quick thoughts on Tobias Harris as well before we move into some questions here, which I assume we'll get to talking about JV Bickerstaff through those, which we got plenty about him. So thoughts on the Tobias Harris deal? Again, that was 2 years, $52 million.
So the funny thing is, and I feel like, I don't know, I could be wrong, but just I feel like there's a sense of like an underwhelming offseason, being that the main acquisitions outside of the draft were THJ and Tobias Harris. And I think the reason for that is just because both of those have been linked to the Pistons for so long, like through James Edwards of the Athletics reports and Omari's and the rest of the beat writers. So I feel like when that happens, it just takes away a little bit of excitement from when the moves actually happen and it turns out that they are a Piston. When the Tobias signing came through, it was funny. And like one of my group chats I sent to my friends, like, yeah, I'd signed Tobias for like 35 to 40 million on 2 years. And literally 10 minutes later, like the report came out that he's signing 2 for 52. So I was a little under. I probably would have liked to get him for a cheaper price and maybe non-guaranteed or team option on the second year, but that wasn't the case. I mean, I definitely like that it's not a 3-year deal or anything like that, but like the Pistons just add 2 guys that were top 3 scorers on playoff teams, with THJ, one team that made it to the finals. I know THJ didn't really do much of anything in the playoffs, but still. So I think they address needs. My big question moving forward is what's going to happen in the big spot. I think you at least need to sign a third big that can come in and protect the rim or spot starts when you need him. But at least in the short term, shooting has been addressed, at least for next season, while you have to hope the rest of Ron Holland shot develops. Like Jaden Ivey shoots better if he's in here for the long haul. And Asar is at, like, I don't think he'll ever be a great or maybe even an average shooter, but while he gets better, and there is a degree of it with the Tobias Harris signing, like the Pistons probably had to pay a little bit more because they were the worst team in the league last season. And there were reports that other teams were interested. So they're still sitting with $26 million in cap space that they'll probably use for a trade. Would I have liked to have Tobias Harris on a little bit less money and more of a team controlled deal? Yes, but at least it's not like a huge long-term commitment, and he can at least help you in the immediate future.
Yeah, with the money thing, I mean, like you said, this is kind of a bad team tax, I think.
Yep.
Just my opinion. I don't know anything on that, but like I imagine a good team probably could have enticed Tobias Harris to play for them and be a bench player, whatever, for less money, just a little bit more than the mid-level exception. So probably close to like 20 a year instead of 26. But the Pistons were the worst team in the NBA, like you said. He's going to be playing more minutes here. It's just it's a little bit more of a long-term rebuild. So he wants the second year guaranteed instead of a team option. But at the end of the day, it's $6 million, right? You're talking about a deal for Tobias Harris, a good, maybe steal type of deal for him would have been $20 million a year. So the Pistons are paying $6 more. Like that's not, I don't think that that's a problem with how much cap space and the flexibility on the cap sheet that they have. And the guy that they got is a absolutely perfect veteran fit for your young guards like Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey, and even Ron Holland to an extent. Because what Tobias Harris is an off-ball scorer. He will get you 17 to 20 points a night. He's going to do it efficiently. He's going to do it at a high volume, but he's not going to do it by dribbling the ball like 10 times in isolation and then chucking up a mid-range shot. Tobias Harris is the type of guy where when he catches the ball, he will be either shooting or passing and probably under 4 or 5 dribbles. It is quick, it is decisive, and like I said, it's generally pretty efficient as well. So not only is he going to give you floor spacing, not only is he going to give you scoring, but he's not taking the ball away from the young players you really want to give those reps to. He's like the perfect outlet at the forward position that this team has just absolutely lacked since, I'm going to say, even before Jeremy Grant, because Jeremy Grant was an ISO-heavy type of player. Like he was great at it, so he deserved those touches. This isn't a slight against Jeremy Grant, but Tobias Harris doesn't do that, and he doesn't need to do that to get his buckets, and they need his buckets. So I really liked this signing. I like the player a lot more than I like the dollar amount, like you said, because I do think this is on the upper end of what's fair to me, what I would have been comfortable with. So, it's not perfect, but in terms of the player that they're getting, absolutely great fit. There's no indication that he's really starting to fall out because of his age too. I know he's 32. But yeah, I think the player's a home run. The contract is maybe, a single, but the player's a home run.
Yeah, and like Truth Tell is bringing up in the chat, like we're definitely nitpicking the
for sure.
specifics of the contract, which is fair, and I think that's all we can really do. But at the end of the day, like if Tobias Harris is shooting like 35-36% from 3 on heavy minutes and volume for you, like you brought up, Wes, are you going to mention like, oh man, I wish we had him for $6 million less per year? And it's not a long-term commitment like Jeremy Grant was for Portland, like Truth Tella also brought up. I have to bring up a quick Tobias Harris story that I have that is not related to like what he brings to the Pistons. So his first stint with the Pistons, I'm at a Lifetime Fitness and I'm on a stationary bike, like just warming up for a workout. I finish, I get up and go to grab a wipe to like wipe off the sweat of the bike. I go, and when I turn around, Avery Bradley is right there and he's like, hey, are you done here? And I'm like taken aback. I'm like, yeah, like, and Tobias Harris is right behind him. So they were just like working out at Lifetime, and I was like,
oh my God,
it was like the wildest thing ever. And then a week later they got traded to LA in the Blake Griffin deal, so it was just like a wild run-in I had with them. Langston Galloway was also there, so it was
my God,
it was just funny. I had to bring that up. That's
the closest thing I've ever had that to that was I was in Detroit for a Pistons game with my dad. We were staying out in the suburbs. Okay, we were not anywhere near downtown. I think we had to drive almost 20 or 30 minutes just to get to the arena. And in the hotel after we came back from the game, Andre Drummond was just chilling in the lobby. I think he must have been meeting one of his boys or something. I don't know what was going on, but like he was just sitting there. Like we are nowhere near Detroit. What are you doing here?
Yeah, this was in the suburbs too. I think it was when they were still playing at the Palace, so it makes sense. But I have some funny Pistons run-ins. Like one time I was standing in line at a Potbelly and John Lure walked in and stood right behind me in line. And I saw Henry Ellenson at Target once. Like I think that's the extent of it. But yeah, it was funny. And yeah, like the man, the myth brings up NBA players are humans. So they're just like us. But yeah,
it's still funny.
It's funny to see some of these guys in everyday life now and then when that happens.
All right, let's jump into some of these questions here. Let's just start here because we didn't get a chance to talk about the coach. So this is from KCP for 3, and it's through in the DBB comments. And he just wants to know, why should he be excited about JB Bickerstaff as the coach?
Great question. Shout out to our guy KCP for 3. I think when the hiring was announced, I was surprised because I thought this would be the time the Pistons would take a shot on a younger guy, a first-time head coach, an up-and-coming assistant that we know is going to get an NBA head coaching job at some point. But then, like, I looked up JB Bickerstaff and I didn't realize he was only 45. Like, this isn't a hire like Monty Williams or even Dwayne Casey. Like, JB would have got another opportunity somewhere in the league, whether it was here or not. We all know that he's focused on defense, which needs to be a big focus for this team. And yeah, there are those reports about what happened at Cleveland towards the end, but there were points where he definitely did like rally that locker room. I know we have another question about this, so I won't go into it too in depth, but I'm sure he'll bring someone in on his staff to focus more on the offensive end of it. And also, like, when JB was let go from Memphis and Cleveland, I thought they were both like scapegoat hires. I didn't necessarily think he deserved to get fired from either of those places. So I don't know. It might just be a time for the Pistons to get a good head coach that brings you experience, but is also a younger guy that can hopefully like just rally this young team around and just change what's going on and put them on a good upward trajectory toward the future.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, JB Bickerstaff has never in his professional coaching career not had this kind of, we're starting at the bottom and we need to build it up. So both in Memphis and in Cleveland, he came in when those rosters were extremely young, and he just really seemed to connect with the young players and kind of help foster an environment that allowed them to grow. I don't want to say that like he drove their player development, because we know that's not exactly how this all works, but he at least created an environment and a team culture where it seemed like a lot of players prioritized getting better and then did get better. So that's really exciting to see. And then, you know, the only other thing I'll say is I was honestly a little nervous about getting a first-time head coach. I know it's exciting and it's kind of like a total unknown, so it could be anything. And there's a chance that you're getting someone who's truly unique and special, and it would be great. But look, they've got a first-time president of basketball operations here, Trajan Langdon. They, at the time of that hire, and I think still now as well, I don't know if they're the youngest team in the league anymore, but at the time when they hired JB Bickerstaff, they were, by about 2 years, like I said, the youngest team in the NBA. And now they're probably still one of the youngest teams in the NBA. So you've got a GM, or president of basketball operations, excuse me, who's learning on the fly, learning on the job. You've got a bunch of players that are just learning how to be NBA players, not even like learning how to be NBA stars, but learning how to be NBA basketball players, professional basketball players. And then you're going to hire a coach who is also learning how to be an NBA head coach on the job. Like that just, it did make me a little bit nervous. So I really like you said, that JB is still a young man. He's only 45. He can still connect with these young players, and he's shown twice that he knows how to connect with these young players still and build up their confidence and help lead you out of this kind of purgatory that the team is in. He's done it twice. I love that. So I'm excited about JB Bickerstaff, as excited as I will let myself be about a head coach, because we all know what happened last summer when we all were very, very excited about the head coach, and it didn't end up well. So I don't think I know anything about head coaches. So I'm just excited that he's got a little bit of history and it looks positive.
Yeah. Like I don't want to get too deep into it either because it's an unknown, and we're not in a position to like know exactly to say enough that it's a good hire, it's okay hire, whatever it is. But the only thing I'll say about first year head coaches is like we see what's going on with the Lakers right now with JJ Redick. The Lakers made a push for Dwayne Casey to join JJ's staff as an assistant, and he's staying in Detroit. The Lakers hired Nate McMillan and Scott Brooks as top assistant coaches to be those experienced guys to, I guess, just help with that transition. So if the Pistons did make a younger, like first-time head coach hire, and I think JJ is a bit of a unique scenario just because of his background, but you probably would have seen similar moves on the staff. So bringing in a guy like JB that has that experience eliminates the need to bring in some of those upper tier assistants. Not saying they won't make a push for a guy like that. But I don't think it's a have to have like it might be in a situation like LA right now.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't even thought of that. So definitely. I mean, they could try to look for more of those like specialized assistants instead of guys who have been head coaches before and their job is partially to teach JJ Redick or who have you to be an NBA head coach. That's a great point. This was we teased this a little bit earlier, but let's dive into it. Let's talk about the bigs. So we've got two questions here. This is from KDA 1024. Do you think the Pistons would be interested in Paul Reed as a backup big? And then Richard Brooks asked, what do we do at the center position with Duren and Stu being the only bigs and most of the free agent options off the table? So what do you think's going on with that center position? What do you think the plan might be? And then do you think they'd have any interest in a guy like Paul Reed?
That's honestly my big question right now. That's the area of this team. Like I just thought whatever you're going to do in the offseason, you need to address shooting and you need to address rim protection. Now that we don't have a big acquisition at this point, I'm like, is Isaiah Stewart just the backup five right now? Like Rock Howard brings up in the chat. If all stays the same, like I think that's the case because there really isn't someone else on the roster. But I think at the very minimum, you have to sign a third big that is even just there in the case of injuries, guys missing games, whatever happens. We know we're like the concerns with Duren on defense and Stu like might be a bit undersized for a traditional 5-man. So I think you at least need someone else. Paul Reed is interesting because from everything that we've seen, the Sixers are hoping to move off him. He is slated to make just about $8 million this year, and it's non-guaranteed. I don't know what happens if he's traded with that. But yeah, he's an interesting option. I mean, there was Wes. We talked about Goga Batadze a lot. He ends up re-signing in Orlando. So some of the top options free agency wise for a backup big are pretty much off the board right now. So I think the most likely path to that getting addressed is via a trade, unless there's a minimum signing. Like YouTube user brings up Don Barlow in the chat. So I don't really know who the trade options would be. Paul Reed's an interesting one. I wouldn't be opposed to it by any means.
Yeah, I like Paul Reed. I think he'd be a good fit. I don't know, maybe this is a bit of a hot take, but I don't think that the starting center is on the roster right now. I think they could make it work with either of Duren or Isaiah Stewart. I think both would have strong arguments to end up being the starting five. But I do think that we're right here to shift Stewart up to that five position just based off of how the team drafted and then signed Tobias Harris and is looking at, bringing back Fontecchio. Asar Thompson's a guy who really should be playing at the four position quite a bit. I'd almost pencil him in as the backup four behind Tobias Harris right now. So I just have this gut feeling that the starting center isn't on the roster. I don't know if that's like a Brook Lopez salary dump or if there's someone else out there that really fits that the team might target and give up an asset for, like a Duren, like a Stewart, like someone else, anyone else on the roster. I don't know. But I do think that we're right because of the injury concerns that KDA and YouTube user brought up in the chat here, that you need a good third center. And I wonder if the starting center just isn't on the roster yet. There's still so much maneuvering that needs to be done, even for the Pistons to just get to the salary floor. They are, I think, about $8 to $10 million underneath the salary floor. So they need to, at a minimum, spend that. They've got 26 total still in space. So, look, I don't know. I mean, you bring in a head coach who is a little bit more defensive minded. You have your front office and your ownership talking about floor spacing and the need for, giving Cade Cunningham space to operate. Isaiah Stewart fits both of those things. Jalen Duren fits neither of those things, but has a lot of potential to one day maybe do one or the other. I just wonder if this is one of those positions where they're going to target a veteran who could really come in and at least fill either a floor spacing or a defensive role with size that Stewart doesn't have to kind of bang around there down low. Because also, when you're looking at this roster, I don't know who they're going to start at the three. My guess is that it's Fontecchio starting next to Tobias Harris. Neither of those guys are good defenders. They're okay defenders. Neither of them are good. Cade Cunningham is a neutral defender. We've talked about that. Tim Hardaway Jr. or Jaden Ivey, whichever one of those two is starting at the two spot, not known as being plus defenders. So like your starting lineup right now, it looks like it might have four guys that just are not definite pluses on defense. Does that mean you turn around and you make sure Isaiah Stewart's going to start? Does that mean you need to go get someone that could be a really great defender at the five? I don't know, but that's going to be a problem, I think. So,
yeah, I guess my question is, if the starting center isn't on this team, do you think, if that is the case, the most likely result is Isaiah Stewart is shifted down or a Jalen Duren trade? Like, I guess, what do you think is the most likely scenario to a world where the starting five isn't currently on the roster?
Yeah, I think there are a couple centers right now that look like they could be salary casualties with their team, those being Clint Capella and Brook Lopez. That would be interested. I'd be interested in both of those, seeing, what it might take to get them into Detroit. The Pistons have plenty of cap space to just kind of eat that. So maybe it's not going to be a big deal. I don't know what the price would be. The other name, I like Wendell Carter Jr. a lot. The Magic are making no sense. I don't know why they've re-signed every single center that they have on their roster, but I think they have, five? Almost all of them should be playing minutes. I don't know how that one's going to shake out, so maybe that's something to monitor. But my guess would be that it's not all in one move. I would guess that you're looking at maybe a salary dump or a legitimate trade where you're going to give up some assets to get a five and then turn around and clean up after that. Like, do you move Stewart because a lot of teams really value him and pencil Duren in as the backup five, which I think is a role he would be fantastic at, by the way? Or flip that, maybe a few guys or a few teams really like Duran, right? And you could get a lot of value on a sell high, something like that. I don't know. I don't know where it's going to go. I can't predict the future, but I just have a gut feeling that whoever's going to start at the 5 isn't added yet.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I think my only question is what I brought up is what the future is like for Stewart and Duran in that
So hard to
world.
predict.
Yeah, like we don't know for sure. And we've heard Stewart's name in trade rumblings. Like, who knows? I think the one thing that we've learned about Trajan Langdon in his short tenure is he's going to keep us on our toes, which is probably
Yep.
a good strategy for a front office to have. But over time, once you can see a pattern of moves, you can start to understand like what he values, maybe when he'll try to offload a guy, something like that. So I think at least for this offseason, we're just in kind of a constant state of wondering, which isn't a bad thing, I don't think.
Well, it keeps it exciting, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of like fun stuff, let's do this question. I was looking forward to this one all week. So this is from Gregory 1988 in the DBB comments, and he just wants us to talk about wing, right? There are a lot of terms that are used to describe positions. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, point guard, shooting guard, so on, wing, forward, big guard, what have you. So Gregory 1998 wants us to just define a wing in today's NBA. It was a longer question, but because of character limits, I parsed it down. So go ahead.
I love this question, and Wes, I'm really interested to see if we're like in the same mindset. But so when I'm like doing my big boards and stuff for draft, I split players into 3 categories, like point guards, wings, and bigs. Sometimes there are players that fit more of a combo archetype, like Jonathan Mobo, for example, was one I put as like a forward big because he's more of a point forward and doesn't really shoot threes. So interesting guys like that. But as for wings, I feel like in an ideal world, it's a 2-3, maybe someone who can even stretch into a 4, a guy that is somewhere in the 6'5" to 6'9", maybe even taller if he has the skill set range. And most of the time for me, I mean, there are guys that are good shot creators as wings, but it's someone that I look to that probably isn't going to be a primary creator. A lot of times the 3-and-D archetype is probably overused. Not all wings are 3-and-Ds. So for me, especially when I'm trying to evaluate prospects, I try to put them all into one of those 3 buckets, but I'm curious to think if you think the same or anything differently.
So I think wing is getting into a role, whereas like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those things, those are more traditional quote unquote positions. So the wing in the NBA is someone that is playing and creating primary off of the wings, those being not the top of the key, but the wings on the 3-point line, the perimeter over there. Those that could either be someone who looks a lot more like a guard or looks a lot more like a forward, but that's a ball handling role, ideally someone that can shoot, but someone that absolutely needs to be able to handle a ball screen, handle a dribble handoff, get to the rim in isolation, and ideally get to the free throw line as well. So those are your wings. Your forward is a bigger body. They could play on the wing, but we saw this a lot with Isaiah Stewart, stationed in the corner a lot more. A forward is a little bit more of a power guy, in my opinion. So like you look at what would be a good here. Let's look at the draft, right? Ron Holland is a wing. Ron Holland is a little smaller, a little slighter, and you want the ball in his hands more often eventually, right, when he reaches his potential. Compare that to a player more like Tijan Stallone, right? Stallone is bigger, he's stronger, and he can bang a little bit more. He's not a guy you would really want handling the ball as much. Stallone's a guy you would want to push down further, closer to the baseline offensively, rather than lift him up higher and place him out on the wing, where Ron Holland's going to mostly play. He's the inverse of that. So to me, I think you have guards, wings, forwards, and bigs. And there's a lot of overlap between those things, but generally your wing is more of a ball handler, big athlete who can attack. Your forward's a little bit more of a banger who can do a little bit of those things. And then your bigs are the guys down low. Guards initiate. So those would be my classifications.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because a lot of your like primary initiators and scorers in today's NBA are wing size, but I would classify them as like point guards, I guess, just because of the role that they play. Like Cade fits in that to me. Luka is another one. It's just a funny one to constantly quibble with because like Ron Holland is definitely a wing to me, but like Cade is a point guard, even though Cade has wing size. So yeah, this is a great question. And I think it's one that might even like constantly change as the NBA continues to just be more and more positionless.
Yeah, well, and it also goes to show how valuable guys like LeBron James. Okay. LeBron James, 6'8", 250, he's strong, he's athletic, but he can basically initiate like a point guard. So what that allows you to do is you could stick LeBron at the forward position, which is where he can play, and he's going to be effective out of it. Or you could basically size up your entire lineup. So Cade gets a little bit of this too. Cade's wing size, but he plays point guard. So you can now have more big wings. You can now have more of these types of players that size is a premium in the NBA. So that's why those guys that can be versatile in the role that they play while having these body types that go up higher are so valuable. You look at like Jokic, right? Offensively, he's almost a point guard, but he is a center. He is a big. And that lets you get away with a guy like Jamal Murray, who's really more of a wing playing at the point guard spot. So that's just where the flexibility gets really valuable, I think.
Yeah, there's outliers. Like YouTube user
Oh,
brings
yeah.
up Paolo. Like that's a great one. Like just because of his size and strength. Like I wouldn't like he says that Paolo is 1,000% a forward. I agree with that. Like
Mhm.
so yeah, I think there's always going to be those interesting use cases that don't fit, or they fit some molds, but they play a different role, which oftentimes is those lead guys on a team these days.
And quickly, just the fun thing with Paulo is the way that he's used is he is used as a point forward, right? Franz Wagner plays the wing. You can just look at the floor when the Magic have the ball offensively, and Paulo Banchero will be lower on the perimeter than will be Franz Wagner, and there's your tell. But Paulo also initiates quite a bit as well, and that's a large part of why he's so valuable in that spot. So let's get into a voicemail question here. This is from Holden talking about the draft.
Hi, this is Holden. We now have 4 top 5 picks on our roster. Which one do you think could bring the most trade value? I mean, we know we're not trading Cunningham, but between Ivy and Thompson, which one should we keep that would help us the most, and which one brings us good trade value? Thanks.
All right, great question. And that was my bad. Not talking about the draft, talking about the current top 5 picks on this roster. I'd made myself a bad note. But all right, Blake, so what do you think? Cunningham obviously has the most trade value on this team. So between guys like Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, Asar Thompson, even Ron Holland to an extent, who has the most trade value and who would have the most value to Detroit to keep instead of move on from?
Yeah, so I'm gonna exclude Ron Holland from the trade value just because I think it's highly unlikely he would get traded. I mean, it's probably unlikely that most of these guys get traded, but just because we don't really know what Ron Holland is, I think Asar Thompson is a better prospect than Ron Holland to me. So Asar is the name that sticks out to me. I just think his the upside he still has, the athleticism. We know he's a good, if not great, defender already. A ton of teams are looking for that. Like, yes, the jump shot is probably always going to be an issue, but I think Asar would probably bring the most back. And with that, like the one that brings the most value for the Pistons to keep, it's also either Thompson or Holland for me. I think those are both your wings that you just talked about that everyone is trying to take swings on for within the draft. You don't know what either of their roles, like the players that they're going to be, they're still developing. Not to say that Jaden Ivey doesn't have trade value, because I think he definitely does. It's just, I think the other two are a little more higher on the hierarchy in terms of trade value for me.
Here, I'll take a contrarian opinion. I wonder if Jaden Ivey might actually have the most value of the three. Let's just leave out Ron Holland here, because Jaden Ivey is really the only player out of that group, Asar Thompson and Jalen Duren, that you could drop into just about any situation in the league, and he would at least be productive, right? And I say that because I've been texting a bunch of people about this, just friends, and trying to figure out long term what the plan could be with Asar Thompson and Jalen Duren, because we know that if Asar Thompson or Jalen Duren never learn how to shoot, you really cannot play those two guys together because they're complete non-shooters. So then the question is the pluses that they offer. Okay, Jalen Duren being a very, very great screen setter, lob threat, and elite offensive rebounder. Okay, defensive rebounder, but elite offensive rebounder. You have to change and adjust the other four players that are out on the court with him because of how bad he is on defense and because he can't shoot the ball. So Jalen Duren has a lot of potential, but you do have to shift how you're going to construct your roster if you're going to keep him around. The same thing you could say about Asar Thompson, because Asar Thompson, as great as he is as a defender, and he's a guy that I do think has like all NBA defense potential out there at the wing/forward spot, right? He can't shoot the basketball, and he's been so bad at shooting the basketball. It would be great if he could just get to 30% one day. So the question then is the defense that he provides worth it enough to change how you're going to build out the rest of your roster? It might be, right? If he's legitimately all defense level one day, it might be worth it. But you don't know if he's going to get there for sure. So there's a lot of unknowns here. So I think the question for Asar or Duren is which guy provides the one positive thing that they do well enough that it's worth kind of changing and adjusting your roster construction to make sure it works and it's maximized and it's valuable. And then based off of that, the other guy you could probably think about moving on from, but then, like, let's say that your answer to this one is Jalen Duren. You would rather have the offensive rebounding and lob threat that he provides, right? You're going to need more defenders. You're going to need more shooters. So you're okay moving on from Asar Thompson. But if you value Jalen Duren more, wouldn't that mean a lot of other teams do as well? And then now you're looking for just a select number of teams that think Asar Thompson's going to be great, but then also have enough shooting that they could take him in and make it work. Like there's a lot of little pieces that go into that kind of decision when you're assessing just the value of those two guys, where I almost think Jaden Ivey being pretty much a plug and play backup shooting guard for just about every single roster in the NBA right now, and still being young with potential to be more. Like, I think he might have more suitors, and therefore maybe he's more valuable over trade.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think you don't know for sure, but I think there's a strong possibility that Jaden Ivey in a different context looks a lot better than the situation in Detroit, just because it's not the cleanest fit in the world. Like, can it work? Yes, but Jaden Ivey still 100% has the upside to go elsewhere and break out, which is something that Detroit has to be okay with if there's a world that they ever move on from him, which is a tough pill to swallow if you do make that move and he grows into whatever his ceiling is.
If JB Bickerstaff just one time in the first game next season runs Jaden Ivey off an Iverson cut and gets him a little quick ISO, I will be over the moon happy. That was just the most frustrating thing last season, was the insistence that Jaden Ivey just has to be a pick and roll ball handler. I'm like, no, that's not what got him drafted in the top 5. Anyway, let's get to this other question here from Matt Welch. And you know what? Let's stick on the young guys for a second, because he's really hoping that Asar Thompson makes a big leap this season with his shot and with his ball handling, and is hoping the same for Jaden Ivey. So I just was curious quickly, like, what do you think could be reasonable next steps for those two players this upcoming season? Like, let's hope that they improve. So what's a reasonable 1 or 2 things that they could improve that would be a really nice step forward for them?
I think it has to be the shooting. For both, like, it's a lot more for Asar Thompson than it is for Ivy, but I don't think Ivy's shot has come along yet as much as we've wanted it to. So just seeing some sort of improvement. I mean, Asar did not shoot the ball well. Like, yes, we saw flashes, but if you can see a bit more consistency and efficiency, I think that's a win. Same for Ivy. I mean, we saw flashes where he shot the ball really well and others that he didn't. Like Fred Vincent's being brought up in the chat as well. Like, we're hoping that he can improve the overall, like, whether he has to tweak something with these guys' shots, but just overall make them more efficient shooters. Jaden Ivey, you can speak to defense as well. But yeah, the biggest thing for both of them is just being more consistent shooters for me. And I'm not optimistic that that's probably ever going to be the case for Asar, but never say never, I guess.
For me, I think Jaden Ivey's a lot closer than Asar Thompson is here. So Jaden Ivey, if he could just be a less streaky 3-point shooter, I think that would be massive for him and his development. Because like you just mentioned, right, I do honestly believe that if you use Jaden Ivey in the way that he was used at Purdue, in the way that Dwayne Casey used Jaden Ivey to start his rookie season before Cade Cunningham went down with injury, like, if you do those things where he's basically a catch and attack player off ball that occasionally takes a DHO and occasionally operates out of a pick and roll, I think he will pretty quickly become a very, very effective scorer, especially with the improvement we saw around the rim last season. But if he could just get better and more consistent from 3, that's going to be huge for him. As far as Asar Thompson, I'm with a YouTube user here because he says Asar Thompson needs to work on his dribbling. I think that's honestly more valuable and more reachable than his jump shot right now. He should obviously continue working on his jump shot, but he just has a ways to go after shooting 18% last season. But if Asar Thompson could be a better ball handler, I think you start to unlock some of that passing vision that we did see at OTE, and he'll still create a little bit of spacing because of that. The thing with Asar Thompson is that he is so athletic and he is so quick that if he is just really good at catch and rip, you really, as a defender, still can't help off all that much, because as you're closing out, he will blow by. So if Asar Thompson can improve his ball handling, it will create just a little bit more space for everyone else that's out on the court with him. And I think you can pair that with it unlocking more of his passing vision as well, and an ability to finish at the rim. Because, like, oh man, one little thing too that he could improve with this ball handling. There were numerous times last season where he would enter into a spin move and he'd have the guy beat, but he'd pick up the ball because he was about to lose it. And so then it gets him in an awkward position because a few times it like happens in transition, so he's not anywhere close to the rim. And then if he picks it up where he's close to the rim but not ready to actually enter into his gather, he's off kilter, off balance, and then kind of makes a panic pass out of that. So if Asar Thompson could even fix that, because his spin move is pretty lethal. He's so quick with it. So if he could just keep the handle through the spin and then finish strong afterwards, I think that alone would be a really big step for him offensively. And then, YouTube user, I also really want to see him used as a roll man because he is so athletic. He'd be a good lob threat. And I think he'd be great out of the short roll because he's a very good standstill passer. So I think Asar Thompson is like a 4, even though he's undersized for that. I think it would really unlock him, at least right away, offensively.
Yeah, and with the spin move thing that you brought up, I think Asar got because when he gets that spin move and creates space, like he can easily get up over defenders and into the mid range.
He's just going too fast.
Yeah, like you almost have to just not commit to something, which I'm sure is a lot easier to say than it is to actually do in practice. But yeah, just keeping those options open, I think will go a long way for what he's able to do with the ball in his hands.
Yeah, agreed. So let's end on this one here. This is from our guy Keepster, and everybody, if you're watching live, please do, like, share, what have you. We appreciate you tuning in here and hanging out with us here on the 4th of July. So happy 4th of July to all of you. But this is Keepster asking a 2-parter question just about the rest of this offseason.
Hello, Blake and Wes. I really enjoy watching you guys' show on YouTube. This is Keepster, substituting the S with the number 5. And again, thank you for including my call. I had a 2-part question. Part 1, can you see Trajan Langdon getting another salary dump along with picks this offseason? Something like what he did with Tim Hardaway Jr.? And if so, what teams would be possible trade partners? Now, I could see the Lakers, especially with LeBron with his recent contract, being a possibility, but I'm not sure about any of the other teams. And then part 2, with another salary dump, the Pistons could end up at the salary cap limit, but could they use the MLE or the room exception to still add another shooter, like Gary Trent Jr. or Buddy Hield or Malik Beasley? All right, thanks, guys.
All right, Blake, it was a great question. So what do you think about seeing another salary dump trade the rest of this offseason, and then maybe list out a couple teams that could be coming from? And then as well, once the Pistons actually are at the cap, now we assume once they reach the salary cap, they will re-sign Simone Fontecchio. That's probably why they offered him the qualifying offer instead of just giving him a contract outright right then and there, so that they could go over the cap to sign him. I wonder if they even have something already kind of worked out within numbers-wise. But regardless, once they get over the cap, once they sign Simone Fontecchio, who are some guys that you might think could be targets with that room exception, with which the Pistons do have? And I believe per Keith Smith is right around $7 or $8 million.
Yeah, and I mean, I think taking on some sort of money in return for assets is probably the most likely path to using the rest of the cap space. We've heard Trajan Langdon say that that's what he's trying to do himself. And yeah, like Truth Teller brings up, Buddy Hield would have been a good name, but he's off to Golden State in a sign and trade. The Lakers are, like Keefster brought up, a great team with this for me. We heard LeBron opt out of his contract so they could do some more stuff. That didn't happen. He signs a max deal and takes like $1 million under what he could have, just so they can avoid that second apron. So they're a team that makes sense. I mean, the other one, just based on how the offseason has played out, like Orlando added KCP and brought back like basically all their guys. I mean, they had cap space, but I could see them trying to get off some money. Like we've heard Wendell Carter Jr. I don't know how truly available he'll be, but
I would give up real stuff for Wendell Carter Jr. for what it's worth. Like real assets, not just salary dump stuff.
Right. Yeah, me too. And the thing with him, like, he definitely helps you space the floor as a 5, but then you can quibble with like, what is he as a rim protector? Like does it really move the needle there that much? another team, like, we don't really know what Chicago is going to do. I mean, they're trying to get off Levine, which seems like they would need to attach real assets for anyone to take, and there's not much of a market there. Other than that, like, I'm just trying to think of teams who fit sort of that Orlando mold, that have kept a lot of people, but also like brought in some guys. Like the Clippers, they lost Paul George, but they might be trying to get off some money too. And then, so in terms of order of operations, do you have to use up the full cap to use one of the room exceptions? Just so I understand how that would play out in terms of the Pistons actually using that.
Okay, so the qualifier is that I am not a cap expert, so I don't know this for sure.
Me
Okay,
neither, obviously.
please nobody quote us on this, but I believe that the room exception is one of those like every other year or types of exceptions like that, where they're not cap tied, so you can't stack the room exception into cap space, but I believe the Pistons will still have access to it after going over the cap. I don't know that for sure, but I believe that is how that could go.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I think like the other names that Keefster brought up were Gary Trent Jr. and Malik Beasley. I wonder if either of those are realistic, just with the Tim Hardaway Jr. Acquisition. Like, I wonder how much overlap there is, and if the Pistons are truly just trying to use up that cap space to return assets, or at this point they're just like, if they want an actual player who makes sense, I'm sure they do in an ideal scenario. Isaac Okoro's getting brought up a ton in the chat. I think that makes a ton of sense if Cleveland's ready to move on from him. And I think YouTube user brought it up, another 5th pick overall that we could bring into the fold. And YouTube user also brings up CJ McCollum, which would allow New Orleans to re-sign Brandon Ingram. That's another good one. I think you could just do the same argument that you would with like Gary Trent Jr., Malik Beasley, if it's overlap with THJ, or like YouTube user also brings up, if you send THJ out in a deal like that. And Truth Teller brings up Tyus Jones. Like, I think that would be a great signing. I think Tyus Jones would be a great backup point guard. I would like just some sort of big to be brought in before a backup point guard is addressed, but I think that would be a great move for the Pistons to make. If you are focusing more on the bigs, like there's also Dario Saric out there who can help you space the floor a bit. We've heard the Pistons linked to Haywood Highsmith a little bit, so that's another name. But yeah, sitting with all this cap space, and Wes, like you mentioned, there's still money you need to spend to hit that salary floor. I think the most likely path forward is using that space to absorb some sort of money that teams are trying to get off on.
All right, so I was just Googling it. This is how all the cap stuff works. Okay, so the room exception, I was wrong. The room exception is basically the mid-level exception for non-tax paying teams. So your room exception you can only use when you are below the cap and have cap room. I was thinking of the biannual exception, which the Pistons do have access to. They would be able to use it because this is an exception that you can get if you are above the salary cap. If you're above the salary cap, you can use this every other year, hence the biannual. And it would be about $9 million. The catch, and this is where things just continue to get weird, is that once you use the biannual exception, you are hard capped at the first tax apron. So it actually lowers the maximum amount of what your total team salary can be. Might not be an issue for Detroit right now, but could potentially be an issue here in the future. So I think more likely, if the Pistons go over the cap, you'd just be looking at then it would be the taxpayer mid-level exception, which I'm going to look this up, is, where we go? I lost it. $10 million.
Okay.
So, yeah, a lot of fun math that we're doing here. But just before we close out, I want to ask you the one guy I really, really like, and I hope the Pistons can get in a salary dump. What would you feel about Gabe Vincent? This team needs a backup point guard. He's a good shooter. He's got playoff experience, so he's a good vet. No, he was injured a little bit, but last season was kind of an outlier for him in his career. I'd be a big fan of Gabe Vincent. He's not too expensive either.
Yeah, I'd like it too. I think the only thing for me is what if there are any injury concerns, but I bet there would be due diligence done there. So if they do bring him in, I guess I wouldn't be as concerned just because I know that there was some sort of process behind the scenes. Makes sense that another like actual NBA player you can add to the rotation, which we know that this team was so badly missing last year. And we've already seen that be addressed a bit through the acquisitions that have been made. So yeah, I definitely take them. And I don't know, like YouTube user brings up that he'd take Gabe in a pick. I don't know if what the assets would be attached to that, but yeah, if you're throwing something alongside him to get off him, that makes sense, but who knows?
Yeah, that one feels like another Tim Hardaway Jr. level move where it's more seconds more so than firsts. But this has been great. Thank you for hanging out here, talking some hoops with me over the 4th of July. I hope you guys have a great dinner with some of your friends there. I hope that all goes well. Everyone that's listening and tuning in live, again, thank you so much. We appreciate you tuning in on the holiday here. Go have a great time, hopefully outside in like a cookout or something. Go enjoy the day. Enjoy the nice summer weather, which hopefully you're having. So, Blake, you could wrap it up from here, but thank you, man. Appreciate you as always.
100%. And yeah, thank you, Wes, for taking the time when you're away enjoying the holiday weekend. It was great taking some time to chat hoops with you. And thank you for everyone that was joining and active in the chat. Great questions yet again. And yeah, just a reminder, because we're super bad about reminding everyone to do this. Please like, subscribe, review if you're listening on podcast platforms. Really helps us move the show along. And we appreciate you guys for doing that. Reminder that you can call our number to ask a question and hear your voice on the podcast. The number for that is 313-355-2717. And special thanks to Sean Corp, managing editor of Detroit Bad Boys, for supporting the show. And shout out to you guys, all the listeners, again, for the great questions and talking points. We'll catch you next week, whether on your commute or live with us on YouTube. We can't wait to talk more Detroit basketball with you all.